Welcome to BeBop Technologies, the new normal. This is our weekly webinar series. I am John Conroy. I'm BeBop's VP of Communications and Market Development, and my colleague can introduce himself, Brian.
Hey guys, I'm Brian Bedell. I'm the Senior Customer Success Specialist. It's my job basically to help the customers transition into cloud workflows on the BeBop platform.
Awesome. Well, good morning. We're doing this at a special time because there was an appetite the last time we did one of our general Q&A sessions like we're going to do today to do an earlier one for our customers and potential customers in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. So thanks for joining us at 8 o'clock a.m. Pacific. Just as a general recap, we do these once a week, and you can sign up for these webinars on the beboptechnology.com/events page. Every week we try to change things up. Sometimes we'll have a focus more on the products and features and services that we offer. Sometimes we'll have customers on to talk about their firsthand experience of using the platform and moving their workflows in post-production to become remote and enable their editors and visual effects artists and post supervisors and everybody in their post team to be able to work from home or work remotely. Why don't we kick it off, Brian? Just from like a super general standpoint, why should somebody move to the cloud?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the most commonly asked questions, to be honest. And, you know, we are still dealing with in 2020 questions about what is the cloud. And so that really kind of starts from there, that we have to explain, okay, well, first of all, you know, when you move your post-production to the cloud, what I think is one of the greatest benefits is that then your post-production facility is accessible everywhere. I spent the last 15 years as a creative, as an editor, director, and working in the creative industry. And when I had the chance to test BeBop at first and see what the power of this cloud-based collaboration was like, it really changed a lot of things that I had been doing from remote workflows before. I mean, normally we had to mail hard drives. We had to try to get all of our projects synced, which, you know, was a lot of conversations, and then little settings can change all the time depending on who set up the project, what settings are on that system, you know, what plugins are installed. There's a lot of things that can really kind of mess up the process and make it less efficient. So when you're working in the cloud, it helps you normalize a lot of that, which makes everything faster. It makes it just it makes it more similar to what you would be doing in a facility where it's set up and managed by your IT team or your assistant editors, whatever that is. So, you know, I think the first thing is that it makes your entire post facility accessible from anywhere. And this is something that was kind of a game changer for me, having worked remotely for so long, being able to centralize all of my media and also maintain those settings and the smoothness of the workstation was really kind of a big deal. And so I think that's probably the biggest issue, or the biggest pro of working in the cloud, is that it just allows you to access that high-powered workstation from anywhere you need to be.
Right. I'm curious, did it cross, once that clicked and once you kind of saw what the new normal could be, what the reality could be for working in the cloud, on a just a more like just day-to-day, just or even personal level, what really kind of, what idea came to mind as sort of like, now I can do this, or what did you see as being potentially the biggest game changer, not just from like the efficiency and being able to do everything remotely, but how that could change your workday or your way of life, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, I've spent most of my career working remotely, and I've been very fortunate to do that. And, you know, I mean, even the career that I've had jumping around from production company to production company, studio to studio, I'm very grateful for that opportunity because I've learned a lot of different workflows. I've learned to adapt very quickly into new
Mm-hmm.
workflows. And one of the things that came with that though is I always had to have this really powerful edit system at my house.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would work for a year or two in an edit bay on site.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly after that show wrapped or whatever, I'd be coming home and then I'd look at my computer and go, wow, this is underpowered.
Yeah.
I really need something that can really work now, and this is not going to hack it. And
Yeah.
you know, I spent somewhere around $15,000 when I was fresh out of film school to make this really powerful edit system because I knew that I was going to have to compete with already established people in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really where I focused all of my attention. I worked a lot during film school to save that money and kind of prepare that and make that plan. I ended up replacing that $15,000 system with an iMac that cost me about $1,200.
Right.
And I mean, and that's really kind of where we're stuck a lot of times as creatives is we have this requirement to have a system that's really powerful that we have available at our fingertips at all times. But the cost burden to us as creatives sometimes can be way too high. You know, we can't even work enough to pay off that system and our rent sometimes. So I think that was one of the things that not only do you have this really powerful system in the cloud, the cost is really low over time. And that in addition to that, when you're working remotely compared to working on site, you lose some of the benefits that come from that larger organization, like having multiple workstations to multitask. So you can spread out renders to one system. You can do an export on another. You can, when I used to do a lot of version editing, where we would have one promo that then needed to be versioned into 20 different promos for different networks, times, days of the week, and things like that. And I may have 7 or 8 of those to do in a night. It was really easy if I had 2 or 3 systems to spread out all of those things because I could be done in a couple of hours as opposed to an 8-hour shift. That's one of the things that I kind of saw as a game changer is that when you're working in the cloud, these are just virtual instances and you can create and destroy them as needed. So having access to a scalable deployment like that was something I looked at and went, okay, this could change everything. And as someone that does, like I have a marketing agency that's fully remote, and we're typically tied to whatever creative I've hired their workstation. And now I don't have that burden of scalability based on a hardware solution. Because if I want to go out and get a contract that maybe I didn't have enough editors for at the time, I can still bid on it. I can still put my bid out. And then if I get it, then I can scale up the number of my systems and I just look for the freelancer at that point. And that was like just seeing that scalability. I mean, even with storage space, you have that same type of scalability in the cloud. I mean, there's so many benefits that allow you to kind of think outside of your where you're at in your career or where your business is. And that was really where I kind of looked at this and went, okay, now that the latency's gone, because I've tried tons of solutions that were remote solutions that there was too much latency. It didn't feel good. It didn't work smoothly.
Right.
Once BeBop solved that problem and I saw that, I went, okay, now I can tap into all of the power of the cloud for whatever creative project I want to do.
That's interesting. I remember, like, I think I'll always remember this throughout my career. You know, we established BeBop about 5 years ago. And a couple of years ago, we were in the process of running basically like a proof of concept with a company, a production company, a reality TV production company that was running the test just to kind of see how everything works, kicking the tires and so forth. And this was a couple of years ago. This was even before we had things like Rocket file transfer and OTA, over the shoulder review and approve and all that. It was still very much its own new thing. And they had an editor specifically that was working on a show. And as you know, and as anybody can imagine, reality TV, you're dealing with an enormous amount of footage, significantly more than you would for a scripted program. But they had an editor who, for family reasons, was having to move up to had already moved and was working kind of halfway between Ventura and Santa Barbara. And obviously that was a gigantic problem for him because, you know, the facility is in El Segundo, and that, you know, you're talking about several hours drive every day. Yeah. So they did the test with him. And after, I think it was maybe about a week and a half or 2 weeks of him kicking the tires, working with his post supervisor who was still in El Segundo. Now that I think about it, we did have OTS at the time because she was able to do the review and approve, you know, remotely. We were talking to him and we asked him, you know, what is like the biggest change that he's noticed. And, you know, we did eventually get into the nitty gritty of everything as far as a lot of the things that you talked about, the scalability, the flexibility, the breathing space, his ability to do stuff without having to go to the facility was a giant difference. But one of the things that I'm always going to hold close to my heart was that he said that honestly the single biggest most important change to him was that he had spent more time with his kids in the past 2 weeks than he had in the previous 4 months. And that really, I think, gets at the core of, on a personal level, why we created BeBop, and because you know, and why we established the company was to enable that kind of flexibility for creatives that has never really existed before. So it's, and now I think about it, speaking of Rocket, and how, since I was thinking about it from the standpoint of the reality television show, how do you get your media into the cloud? Because that alone could appear very daunting based off of how people had experienced it before.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, I think that's one of the you kind of hit on a couple of questions that I come up against a lot when I'm working with editors, when I'm working with the post supers and talking to them about how to move their productions into the cloud. It's always about transport, right? So there are lots of ways that you can do this. Here at BeBop, we've developed the Rocket protocol, which was built from the ground up, coding wise, to be a very fast transfer that is really only limited by your own bandwidth. So we do have a direct ingest that is fully secure and encrypted. I mean, that's another great thing about working in the cloud, is that you have fully secure transport of all of your content, whereas otherwise you have a hard drive that's just floating around between your facility and the creative. Who knows where that could end up? I mean, I've had people use Uber drivers to send me their drives before, and I just went, okay, that's maybe not the most secure way of moving content, but
I'm sure that was a Marvel movie. And
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, so we do have here at BeBop, we have Rocket, but once you've decided to work in the cloud, then you have access to all that the cloud offers. So you also have ways of ingesting into any of the cloud service providers, which that also comes into when you're looking at how to transfer your footage and you're thinking about your workflow. We have to kind of think about everything in our workflow. Mm-hmm. So do we need to edit camera raw, 4K, 8K? I mean, what's really the delivery standard that we're going to do? And one of the things that I love about this, coming from a traditional film school background where I cut on the cells, you think a little bit more about the offline online workflow. Mm-hmm. And so, most reality companies are doing some type of an offline workflow because you can't ingest full res HD for all of the massive amount of hours that are shot. I think back when I worked in the reality industry, I think it was somewhere 8 to 10 hours of footage, of shot footage per 30 seconds of deliverable content. And so we had rooms full of tapes. Mm-hmm. And when I was kind of working my way up the chain and I became an online editor, it was my job to go and take those tapes to online the project from the offline into, and that, I mean, that's crazy, right? But that we put that much content out, but that's kind of the genre. And so mm-hmm. when you're looking at moving to the cloud, you can't just do that. You can't just edit raw the way that people may be used to now, even though the technology exists. So we want to look at maybe an offline workflow, or we want to look at how we can utilize some of the tiered cloud storage to move in the footage into slower, colder storage, and then prioritize what moves into what BeBop uses is high-speed SSD storage in the cloud. We want to prioritize that only to the edit material. So we can use the Rocket protocol to move in what we need to, but we also have access to all of the normal transfer protocols to get into tiered storage, and also then all of the strengths of the cloud service providers, and you can attach solutions to that storage. So you can do transcoding in the cloud. So you can upload the raw footage, have it transcoded by a cloud service provider, and then have that transcoded footage delivered directly into BeBop, so that your work, I mean, there's so many options that you don't have really on site without a ton of hardware investment.
How, from your perspective, how do the workstations perform? Or maybe even just kind of also, I would include in that, like, what are the workstations? What do we mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, so what's great about working in the cloud, as I mentioned earlier, you can terminate and stand up new workstations whenever you need. What's great about that is that you don't have to worry about what your system specs are anymore. You know, I didn't have to replace a full-on edit station with an iMac anymore, because I can terminate an old workstation and put in the latest and greatest. And so all of the CSPs, the cloud service providers, have different offerings of different types of virtual machines. So the machine that we typically deploy for BeBop for the creative users, it's a 12-core processor. It has somewhere between 112 to 120 gigs of RAM. It has an 8 gigabyte video card. So these are super powered systems. Even my current hardware solution, I think, is a 12-core processor with 40 gigs of RAM. And then I have a really great ATI Radeon card in it, graphics card, but it still gets bogged down. And the thing is, I'd have to go out and buy something to upgrade that, just a singular part. And it may or may not work because my hardware may be outdated, like some element of it. So when you're looking at these virtual machines, you get to scale those up as the new technology comes out, and you don't have to foot the bill. That's footed by Amazon, Google, and Microsoft whenever they release those new VMs onto their platform. Now, when it comes to the performance on the cloud, you know, I think that the most honest answer I can give about this is that every time I've moved to a different company, to a different studio or production company or marketing agency or creative agency, whatever, each system has its own little nuances that you have to adjust to. And as a creative, we just kind of get used to that. And it's always better to adapt our workflow to the resources that we're given than trying to bullishly push our workflow into that system. So there are some nuances about working in the cloud. What I've found is that the benefits of working with these faster systems with centralized data and all of the benefits that come with the cloud have far outweighed the things that I've experienced. I feel as though there is a millisecond latency between working in the cloud and working on a hardware solution. But it's something that after an hour or so, you totally forget. Your body adapts to it. That's our job as creatives, is to utilize what we have. So there is, I mean, just being completely honest, there's a slighter bit of latency compared to working on a hardware solution. And there's also a difference between, you know, Apple doesn't allow to virtualize their operating system. Right. So these are Windows-based systems. So there is a little bit of adaptation when it comes to, if you are a Mac user moving into a Windows environment, which can be we found has been a little bit difficult for some people at times. But again, after working in it for a little bit, you forget about the operating system that you're in, because the real work is done inside of your creative apps. Right. And your creative apps, they're the same, whether you're in the cloud or whether you're in on your hardware solution. It's all the same. And I honestly feel that because this is a bit nuanced, working in the cloud, we actually have more solutions available to adapt to that than we do on a hardware solution. You know, like if I have dropped frames on my hardware computer, there's not a whole lot I can do other than run out and buy more RAM or replace my video card or buy a new processor. And there's not really anything we can do. These systems are so powerful in the cloud that if we see dropped frames, we 99.999% of the time, that's because of your bandwidth, your internet bandwidth.
Yeah.
And so although you are limited by that most of the time, there are ways you can adapt your workflow to overcome it. And
right.
You don't have that possibility when you're working on-prem.
Yeah. It's that idea of like, oh, well, maybe don't have 4 televisions streaming Netflix at the same time while you're trying to work.
Yeah.
That really can make the difference. Well, and when you brought up the latency too, I think, I know that there's also the part of that also comes down to sometimes the geography. I mean, it has to do with how close you are to the cloud data center, and what that raw bandwidth is. I mean, I remember being at NAB a couple of years ago when we were running demos in our hotel room or in a hotel suite at the Mirage, using the hotel room Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Anybody who's ever used hotel Wi-Fi, how wonderfully high-powered and faultless it is. And we had a film school student who was interning with us that summer, and she was able to make cuts, do the whole 9 yards on the Mirage Hotel's basic Wi-Fi, which I couldn't even get my email on my phone.
Yeah, it's so when I was first introduced to BeBop, I was working at a TV network, and the Post Super was looking at it as a solution for primarily disaster recovery. And so I had a background in computers and engineering. And so he asked me to kind of poke around on the platform and try to see whether or not it'd be a viable solution. Part of my testing process, I happened to be going down for a friend's wedding down in San Diego. Mm-hmm. And I was staying in a hotel, and I continued to test on their Wi-Fi in the hotel. And this is a smaller hotel down in San Diego, not something like the Mirage in Las Vegas, where you'd expect they have a better bandwidth. But even at this, right. It's the problem with ISPs, right? We're told it's going to be one thing. What we actually get is something totally different. But even doing my testing in that hotel room, that was part of what really convinced me that this is the future. This is the way we're going. And, just to tell that, I think this is such a hilarious situation in hindsight. I was scheduled to do a webinar for BeBop, and the power company decided to do some maintenance on the power lines that day. So I woke up that morning preparing to do a webinar and had no power at my house. Obviously, that's an issue when you're connecting to some type of a powered modem or router and wanting internet connection. So I really tried to think about a solution, just going, okay, do I just cancel? Do I try to find someone to take my place? What do I do about this? And then I thought about it, I said, we're surrounded by all this technology. So what I did was I plugged in a 110 adapter into my car. And I needed that to plug in my laptop because my laptop needed to have power connected to it because it had died overnight. And then I hooked up my phone to the car as well and put on a hotspot. Mm-hmm. So I used the hotspot from my phone to simultaneously stream a webinar and also run a BeBop workstation and do editing in the cloud. If that doesn't convince you of how much things have changed, I'm not sure what can, because even with that, it was an acceptable amount of latency given the circumstances. Mm-hmm. If I was on location, let's say I was shooting out in the desert, that may be the best option that I have to make sure that I'm getting the shots I need, mm-hmm. While editing. You could take a solution with you, but what that allows me to do is that I could set up something to ingest it, to take a look at it quickly, to do an offline workflow. And then while I make sure those shots are right, I can then just tell my editor who's located in, Jamaica, mm-hmm. to go ahead and start cutting that scene because it's going to work. I mean, so that there's so much power to it, and I really do think that the latency. What's funny is that the latency that I was mentioning actually doesn't have to do with network latency. It's about the feel of the when you
Oh
click
yeah.
a command or you hit the space bar, how much time it takes to throttle that down. And there are no solutions that give you zero latency. Even on your hardware solution, we have the speed of light problem. We have that the command from your thumb hitting the space bar cannot instantaneously stop the computer. It has to travel through the wires, and there is an amount of latency. On the cloud, what I'm talking about is it does have to do with the network, but it's more about the latency, the feel of the latency.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that is completely subjective
Right.
to every creative. But when you're not judging it, actively judging that latency, you adapt to it, and it becomes just the way that your body adapts to to that situation. And BeBop has been the only solution I've found that makes it acceptable. That not just acceptable, but works. That it doesn't interfere with my creative process in any way.
That's a key difference. I think we're gonna run out of time in a couple of minutes. So this has been awesome. And it just as a quick, just to cover off, because inevitably there's always a question, as there should be, about like, how much does it cost? And just to kind of generally cover that for folks, we have, first off, we give people the option to do a 48-hour free trial in 6 regions around the world, 6 cloud regions around the world that you'd be connecting to, that provide sample media, and you wouldn't be able to upload or download your footage, but you get to mess around with the sample media and test out that experience. And I think experience what you were talking about, Brian, which is that the not only does it work, it feels very natural and organic. And ideally, BeBop I would describe as being ideally designed for teams of creatives rather than individual editors, and that's largely because there are costs outside of a BeBop subscription, which is going to run usually $100 to $250 a month for full access to the workstation, the over-the-shoulder review and approve, the BeBop Rocket to get the media in. And so forth, plus access to our support. But that there are costs involved, with your cloud service provider for putting in the infrastructure, whether you're working with Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud Platform or Amazon Web Services and so forth. And those kind of costs are usually a lot easier to manage and a lot easier to handle and swallow when you've got a team of creatives working together. But those BeBop workstations, I mean, one of the most important beauties to it is that, when we created the product, we set out to not be the kind of company that says we've created the perfect solution. All you have to do is change the way you do everything. Everybody at BeBop came up out of the entertainment industry. We've all cut our teeth there. We all spent the bulk of our careers in various capacities, from editors to visual effects artists to producers, directors, the whole nine. So we created the software that we know that it works for post-production workflows, because we worked and work in post-production workflows. And so part of the benefit of BeBop is that, rather than creating a brand new editing tool, the whole idea there is to let creatives use the tools that they already use every day. And that's why we've worked really hard to establish our great partnerships with companies like Adobe for their Creative Cloud Suite, with Autodesk for Maya, with the Foundry, and their suite of visual effects products, Nuke, and so forth. So the idea being that, whatever of those softwares you use, whatever ones you have a license for, that same license you can use on the BeBop platform to work exactly the same way as you would if you were on-prem. So just wanted to cover off on that. We're running out of time. Brian, thank you again. This was awesome. And I will inevitably talk to you later today. Thanks for joining us for the new normal, and we'll see you next week.